Hey everyone, Ryan here with Plague Scythe Studios. Welcome back to Pedalhead, and a particularly dense episode at that. Today, I'm giving you a 3-for-1 special because all of these pedals, as different as they are, ranging from pocket change to probably too expensive to recommend to most people, they all have one thing in common. They all released in the year 2020, that good old dumpster fire, and for one particular reason or another, I either forgot to make a video on them, pushed it out too far to be relevant, or I simply didn't have that pedal in my possession the year that it released. So 2022 is already like 3/4 of the way here. So before we get any more delinquent, I wanted to cover what I think are some of the most interesting pedals that released last year for one reason or the other. So in no particular order, the Amazon Basics booster pedal, the VOX cutting edge, and of course, the Rainger Minibar liquid analyzer. Realistically, there's probably enough content to warrant a separate cutting edge and minibar video, but I think I crammed everything I want to see in this video and want to demonstrate, and I definitely didn't want to miss out on the conversation surrounding this line of pedals, because as simplistic of an effect as this is, and it's one that I've sort of covered in the past, not this particular model, I think the attitude among other gear manufacturers and the climate that this pedal released in is the real interesting story here. So without further ado, this is the box. I do have the box, cue the JHS theme. And this is the pedal that I received when ordering a particular SKU off of everyone's favorite online retailer overlord, Amazon.com. Now the pedal that I received says Coco on the bottom and the rear panel, but the page that I ordered this from says Amazon Basics Boost Guitar Effect Pedal. And this is interesting for several reasons. So a lot of content creators have already discussed this topic when this was a bit newer, but I ordered this, I think, in January or February of this year, so it had some time between the initial release of this pedal line and the time that I bought it. So some things probably have changed in terms of stocking and warehouse, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Amazon Basics branding. This covers items that, as the name would suggest, are just kind of household, you gotta have them. Oh man, my charging cable just broke. I really need something real quick and cheap. Oh look, Amazon Basics has a USB Type-C cable that's, a bit cheaper than the competition. Or I need a spare keyboard for, the computer I don't use all the time in this spare bedroom office. Or I need a new office chair for that. Or maybe I need some, to-go lunch container. So I'm gonna buy some Amazon Basics cheap Tupperware. That's the kind of brand we're talking about. Household, basic stuff, again, as the name would suggest, that is so common, that ships so much volume that Amazon thinks they can make, a few bucks here and there just from the sheer number of things they're going to sell under that branding. Now, the guitar industry, and especially the pedal market, is an extremely diverse one because oftentimes on this channel we'll talk about one-off pedals like this or ones that are hand-assembled and cost north of $200–300 because of the boutique nature of them. But there's also mass production pedals that you can buy off of Reverb or eBay for less than $20 a lot of the times. And these are ones that oftentimes are based on iconic circuits, oftentimes more simple circuits, and the sheer volumes of pedals that these overseas manufacturers can produce is oftentimes why you can have one of these for $20 or so. You know, there's cheaper labor. The components don't have to ship across the seas. They're oftentimes made right there in Asia. All these factors that built in to make these products so affordable, even though they pretty much sound the same as what they're going for in terms of the circuit design. You know, whether it be a Boss DS1 knockoff or like the Mosky Black Rat that I featured on this channel, it sounds pretty much identical to a regular Rat, especially the Turbo Rat mode. And I admit I'm just a sample size of one, but I've personally never had any issues with any of these micro-sized pedals that I've bought or tried over the years. They've all worked, never had any malfunctions with them, no scratchy pots, no foot switches that stopped working after a week. I'm sure that eventually they're all going to break down, but who knows, maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now that will be the case. I probably wouldn't recommend them to someone who's a semi-pro and gigging with a full pedal board 3 times a week, but maybe it'll still hold up for you. And honestly, for the cost they go for, I'd be willing to risk buy 2 or 3 at a time, and if they last, they last. If not, I still think they're kind of worth the money. Now, being the American that I am, I certainly prefer to keep my gear expenditures within the United States border, and especially North America if possible, but there is a place for these kind of pedals, I think, in the market. And if that introduces someone to an effect they never could have afforded otherwise, or if they get the sound they're looking for, there's so many things that I think really helps about this pricing model, and especially the compact nature of these. Now, I could say just about all of that when it comes to any affordable pedal in this price range and form factor. So what's the deal with Amazon Basics? Well, the interesting takeaway to me, and something that a lot of content creators have pointed out, is that Amazon obviously looked at this price range and this particular piece of gear and said, we could be making money off this. Why are we hosting all of these, private labels and brands selling this stuff when we could be making a piece of that pie? Why don't we go out and negotiate with a manufacturer and they can build pedals for us and we can put our label on it and ta-da. Now we have a direct sales. We don't have to give a cut to a middleman. And that's essentially what has happened here. Amazon themselves, Jeff Bezos, has not hired, a whole new team to hand assemble a bunch of pedals. That's not what's happening here. This is obviously private label, which is fine. That's what happens in all kinds of industries, most of them, in fact. It's what cracks me up when certain people argue up and down that this brand of, the name brand, perhaps, of aluminum foil is better than the store brand, or that this ketchup is different from this ketchup, even though they're in the exact same bottle, or this, dish detergent does something different from this dish detergent. And then you look around the back and, oh, wow, they have almost the exact same lot number and code date, and they were coming from the same manufacturer, and all they did was put it in a different bottle and label and, slap a different name on it. And that's kind of what's happening here. Now, all of the promotional images on Amazon and even a lot of the reviews show a pedal that says Amazon Basics on the bottom and even has a different font for booster here. Did I get the wrong product? No, I just got one with a different label. It is the exact same thing, and they don't seem to even be hiding it. So probably what happened is they ran out of the Amazon Basics at that point, the ones that were labeled as such, and said, yeah, whatever, close enough. It's the same product number. It's just probably has a different -A1 or B1 or whatever. And they shipped this out instead. So don't be surprised with a lot of these. I would imagine, whether it be Mosky or I don't think Moore so much, but there are other budget brands like this, Donner, that, if you buy one of these, maybe you could end up with a pedal that says something different, but it's the same thing underneath. So I suppose the major takeaway here before we get into more tonal demonstrations is guitar is not dead. Gotta love that old worn out chestnut. So many people proclaiming, well, pop stations and hip hop music and all these things. That's all people listen to now. So guitar music's dead. Give it up. The industry's going nowhere. And if Amazon Basics thinks they can make a few bucks off of some rebranded pedals, it's obvious the industry is doing just fine. Just look at Reverb, look at the supply and demand of all kinds of guitar gear. It may not be the most money-making thing to pursue as an individual artist nowadays. That is particularly true of most music, but the guitar industry is doing just fine. If Amazon thinks that this is a worthwhile product to sell under their banner, then we don't have a whole lot to worry about. So let's talk about why you might be interested in not only this circuit, but this price of circuit, because I think this opens up the use cases, the potential buyers, to far more than those that I would recommend the source pedal to. And when I say source pedal, this is basically an MXR Micro Amp Plus. Now, if we stuck a Micro Amp Plus next to this Amazon Basics equivalent, I can about guarantee you're going to hear some differences, especially with the way the operational amplifier reacts. I think this doesn't have as much clean gain on tap. The original Micro Amp actually has like 26 dB of boost available, which is incredible. Essentially what MXR did was de-engineer the MXR Distortion Plus, remove all the clipping diodes and rework the circuit, and you got a clean boost, because a clipping circuit, whether it be soft clipping in the loop of the op amp or after it in the output stage, kills a lot of the output volume since you're slashing part of the waveform off. So in order to make that work, oftentimes you implement an operational amplifier to boost the level either ahead or after the distortion stage to make up for that. But when you get rid of all this distortion, you've got a really nice clean boost. That's essentially what this does, but add some EQ controls on top of it, just like the Micro Amp Plus does. Almost without fail, I find a dedicated bass and treble control to be superior to a simple tone control, because generally that's just like a high frequency roll off anyway. So you're really just changing how much brightness is in the circuit path, and kind of changes the mid frequency that it's targeting. But with this, you want more treble or bass, you can turn those up. You want more mids, just turn both of them down and turn the drive up a little bit. So I find, especially when you're driving a tube amplifier, the frequencies that are hitting it up front really matter, because maybe if you just turn up the drive really high, it's going to be spiky and too much treble content, then you can control that, or vice versa. You can tighten up a high gain amplifier by turning some of the bass frequencies down. So, I've been on my soapbox plenty of times about the merits of clean boost pedals. I've never really gotten into one that is this simplistic, but I think this is a good option, because the micro preamp is probably a great way to start for a lot of people that have not delved into clean boost. And I don't think there's really a single genre out there that wouldn't at least somewhat benefit from having a clean boost in front of you, whether you want to slam the front end of your amplifier for just a little more gain, clean gain at that, saturate the preamp tubes for a solo or a lead. You can kind of change the voicing of your guitar going into the amplifier on the fly without ever having to change pickups or the amplifier controls. You can simply use this as a half channel, as I like to do oftentimes, where it kind of fits in between channel 1 and channel 2 of an amplifier, where if you hit this hard, it kind of gives you a more crunchy breakup sound on channel 1, or maybe you've got kind of a more crunch sound on channel 2, and then you hit that and you're into full-blown rhythm mode. There's so many things you can use a clean boost pedal for, and that's at the $90 to $150 price point. But with the Amazon Basics pedal, it's priced at such a point that it opens up a whole new market for people that don't want to spend more than $20, $25 and may want to pair something like this with something that's a little more affordable. Whether you spent $300 on an amp model or 20 years ago, or you've spent $3,000 on a tube amplifier head today, this pedal is going to deliver. And, I kind of foresee comments of like, oh, why are you pairing a $25 pedal with a $1,600 tube amplifier? That's not going to tell you anything. Actually, it tells you a lot. This tells you that this is not the bottleneck of your tone. It pairs well with, high quality tube amplifiers. It's going to pair well with anything. If it sounds good, it's going to probably sound better with this, depending on how you use it. So whether you want to breathe new life into a 15 or 20-year-old amp modeler that doesn't have this capability, or you're just now tinkering around with effects pedals in general and you want to see what the hype is all about and what each one does and how it reacts to your rig, or you have a perfectly decent rig and you just want a every now and again kind of effect without blowing your budget, I think this is a perfectly adequate pedal line to look at. While I chose the booster model because I feel like this is kind of the pinnacle of a basic effect, it doesn't really color your signal, it's just manipulating volume levels ultimately. There are others in the line, about half a dozen more. There's a compressor, there's like a DS1 style distortion, there's a tube screamer style overdrive, a basic tuner. The digital effects are a little more expensive, they're like $40 with the looper and delay because of the digital components. But again, I think all of these are good, a good way to get your foot in the door when it comes to just what is an overall basic overdrive or a basic booster. So check it out. These next couple of stomp boxes were announced at NAMM 2020, and I've been looking forward to getting my hands on them ever since. And this one did not disappoint. This is the VOX Cutting Edge. This is a part of the VALVENERGY lineup that's now been out for about a year and a half. And this is essentially VOX's take on the American high gain tone amp in a box type of pedal. Now, when I say amp in a box, you've probably heard a bunch of pedals that are described this way. It's kind of a class of, I would say, distortion pedal. Well, it can be an overdrive pedal. It can be just about anything, honestly, because what pedal designers often do is usually they'll take the preamplifier section of a renowned amplifier, maybe try to sprinkle in some power amp coloration if that's what they're going for, and turn it into a pedal design by replacing the preamplifier tubes with hard clipping sections, or maybe even transistors with some filtering, and shrink it down, and basically you've got the essential circuit of an amplifier in a box. Maybe do some frequency manipulation to make it play nicely in front of a clean channel of an amplifier, and done. That's kind of what an amp in the box is. Now, VOX took this one step further because this isn't just your, plain Jane transistor or clipping diode implementation. This uses the Korg NuTube. The NuTube technology has been out for a number of years now, but they've only really released it between the VOX and Korg brands in either pedal formats or little like micro amp heads and a bunch of products that really I had no interest in. And the way they were using it, I didn't really think it sounded all that different or all that good or impressive. This changes all of that because this pedal is absolutely insane. And though I don't have any of the other ones with me, I would very much like to try them at some point and use them to their full potential to see if the NuTube technology serves them as well as it does this. Now, a NuTube is essentially a surface mount dual triode package that takes place of something like a 12AX7 preamp tube. That's also a dual triode device. They're not going to sound 100% identical because they work off of different voltage ranges and they do have different characteristics, but it's essentially a little bitty vacuum tube. So you design around those differences and I think you can get some incredibly convincing results, just like this pedal, because I think VOX nailed it with this. In fact, in some ways, it sounds better than the actual preamplifier that it's based on. And disclaimer, I don't know 100% for a fact that it's based off of a certain preamplifier, but come on. I think the intro kind of proves this. So essentially, you got a full tone stack. You have output volume. You've got, your preamplifier gain control, which because this is a metal-inspired pedal, goes from a pretty high gain to ridiculously high gain. So not a whole lot of range there, but usable throughout the entire thing. And then the tight control is basically like having a low frequency cutoff as you roll it up in terms of a preamplifier EQ. So it does tighten up your guitar tone. Unfortunately, it's not like a high frequency boost, which I think I probably would have preferred as long as it wasn't noisy, because you do lose the bottom end of your gain. It doesn't saturate as much when you roll the tight control all the way. But for most down-tuned 6 strings, even I think a lot of 7-string applications, you will not need anything in front of this pedal. It is good enough as is, which is something you cannot say about some American high-gain amplifiers. The other pedals in the lineup feature more or less the same controls, except they have a bright switch in lieu of the tight control, which makes sense for the vintage amplifier sounds they're going after with those preamp models. One of them's like a VOX AC30, which you would guess it is VOX. One's more like a Marshall Plexi sound, and one's like boutique, whatever that means. Maybe it's Dumble or Trainwreck or whatever. But the feature set's pretty much the same. And one feature that I would very much like to try that I can't without the other pedals is this link control, which apparently, if you daisy chain all these pedals together, you essentially turn off all the other ones when you turn one on. So there's some cool digital control going there, and you could very well make up, like a preamp pedal board out of these things. And, assuming you wouldn't want to cascade the gain in any way, you can switch channels. And this edition probably isn't going to save anyone from having to use a MIDI pedal switcher or even just a loop switcher in general for a lot of their rigs, but I do always like to see this kind of communication built in when it comes to a singular line of pedals. Also on the front here, there is the mode selector, which goes between standard, preamp, and integrated cab sim mode. Now, as a lot of you know, I have big problems with most pedals that have a cab mode because they generally sound like crap when you set them side by side to the real deal. This is really no different, but I'm always glad that they have something instead of nothing. The preamplifier mode is kind of the one that you would run into the effects loop of an amplifier if you're going to use this as, you know, kind of the entire preamp signal chain, which is the way I would recommend someone that only plays metal to do that. I think you get the most authentic sounds that way. But I gotta say, I was expecting one of these to be like stand out and be the one to recommend. The standard, though, is pretty much just as good as the preamp. This mode shifts the output frequency response to play more nicely with clean preamplifiers, which will already kind of highlight the high frequencies, and you definitely have to change your settings when you do that, but as long as you have a good clean sound dialed in, this thing is going to sound massive in front of a clean channel. And I think in some ways, some people might like it better. I find the preamp mode on this one to be cleaner, less saturated, if that makes sense, a little tighter, whereas putting this in front of a bank of, you know, maybe one or two tube amplifier gain stages makes it saturate and kind of fill in a way that I think a lot of people are going to like as well. So pick your poison. It sounds great in both modes, and I imagine that's going to be the way the other ones are, which kind of makes sense, right? I mean, you've got something that essentially sounds like tubes in here, so it just plays nicely either way. And finally, probably what is the most iconic feature of this pedal line, even if it's not all that useful, it is pretty damn cool, the OLED screen, which constantly displays the incoming waveform of this pedal. So, you know, if you've got a distortion up front or a preamp boost, you'll be able to see that, or if you're just sending a raw guitar signal through there, you'll be able to see all the waveforms, and it's pretty neat. It's not, again, exactly the most useful thing ever. It's not like it tracks every waveform perfectly. It seems to me if you play about a standard A is kind of where the waveform is stable. But again, it's kind of neat. The more important thing is it tells you what mode you're in. So when it's bypassed, it'll just show you the waveform, and then there will be no illuminated red strip here. That does turn on when you engage the pedal, and it'll tell you, hey, you're in cab mode or preamp mode or standard mode, which is nice to know. All of that combined makes this a pedal that is far more expensive than the last one we looked at, but honestly not outrageous. And it kind of surprises me they were able to make something like this for the cost that they're selling now. Currently, as I'm recording this video, this is going for about $180. I think that's about what was paid for this when I got it. It was a gift though last Christmas, so I can't tell you for 100% fact. But when you consider the preamplifier, you know, in a box nature of this, a lot of pedals in that class go for well over $100 anyway. Oftentimes $150, $200 plus for the lower volume pedal builders. But you throw in the linked functionality, the mode functionality, the OLED screen, just the NuTube alone, and it's kind of crazy that they were able to fit all of this in a pedal for less than $200. Now, obviously, they're going to be able to get those NuTubes way cheaper than we can. It's VOX/Korg. You know, they're not going to pay themselves a profit. So they're just, you know, building those parts, and whatever the cost is built into it, that's what it costs them. However, if one of us try to go online and buy a NuTube, you're looking at like $30 to $50 each, which is crazy. It is a new technology. They're, you know, low supply, so it kind of makes sense. But either way, I think this is a far better value than the initial price lets on, even if it is a bit of a one-trick pony, especially when it comes to this one. I'm sure some of the other lower to mid-gain drives have a more usable range and more variety of sounds on tap, but I gotta say, if you want the boosted American high-gain sound in a box, I've not found a better one yet. For the money, it is a little bit more than I would like to pay or like to recommend people to pay, because we got a decent amp modeler, or even one of like the little more micro preamps, you're going to slaughter this in terms of price, and even those come with a clean channel. This one does not. But for the tonal quality that you're getting here, I am hard-pressed to find a bad thing to say about this, other than don't use the 9-volt battery. It lasts for like an hour and a half, 2 max, and then you're done. So definitely need an external power supply with this. So back to the sound demonstrations we go, as I show you some control sweepage in the preamplifier mode, going through the single rectifier's power amp into a reactive load, into a cabinet impulse response. Got all that? Because I barely do. As you likely noticed, tons of gain on tap, perhaps more usable gain than the amplifier it's based off of, and with the tight control, you can get those fantastic contemporary metal chugs. But if you play in an extended range tuning or something really, really low and really fat, then perhaps the tight control is going to do it for you. But fear not, because this thing takes boosts like a champ, and whether they be extremely inexpensive like this one or something from perhaps a boutique Canadian amplifier and pedal builder, this thing's going to sound really good with it. So that kind of covers one of the major use cases for this pedal, and perhaps my favorite one. It assumes that you have an outboard power amplifier, hopefully the tube variety, or one that, even if it's solid state, has some EQ options to make it sound big and beefy and like a tube power amp without hardly any negative feedback, because that's basically what the rectifier modern power amp does, and it very much contributes to the sound of the rectifier amp as a whole. So you kind of have to have that built in to get the full potential out of this pedal in that mode. But what about the standard mode? What if you have a clean channel, or you've got a whole host of amp in a box pedals that you want to use this with, and you don't want to change your setup? Well, again, the good news is it sounds really great through that as well. If you have a decent Fender style clean channel and a capable power amplifier, preferably with presence controls, and depth would be nice if it has it as well, you're going to be able to get a great sound with this in front of that amp or in the loop of that amp. I'm going to use the Mark IV for this demonstration because of the graphic EQ, kind of fine tune some stuff after the preamplifier section. So if you want that kind of granularity, I would recommend adding some sort of graphic EQ pedal after this, just to give you some options that you don't have with the built-in EQ here, or perhaps even on your amplifier. But besides that, you don't really need a whole lot else to get a good tone. Okay, let's say that you like the sound of everything you've heard so far, but you don't have a big tube amplifier head or 4x12 cabinet to play through. Maybe you've got a solid state amplifier, maybe like a 1x8, 1x10, and you're just not convinced it's going to sound good. Well, you have a couple interesting options that you can explore with this, both being the direct route, especially for recording or playing silently through headphones and an audio interface. I think one is certainly more capable than the other, but hey, you got options. So if you wanted to record this pedal directly, I would recommend running it through an audio interface and then loading up a couple VST plugins. The first one would be a power amplifier sim, such as the Ignite Amps TPA-1, that allows you to dial up the presence and depth lack of negative feedback, which they label as resonance. You can even bias the tubes differently, change the tube type, and that will basically give you all the virtual control that you need for that power amplifier sound. Again, another great candidate if you want to use a pedal is the More Radar, which has that power amplifier and graphic EQ capability built in, which kind of takes care of everything for you, as well as the cab impulse response loading, which is the second VST plugin you would need. So using the same cab sound, ones that I've shot in my real cabs, it is basically indistinguishable from the real thing when recording in direct mode, which again tells you just how great of a preamplifier design this is. The second thing you can do is ditch any outboard gear, any pedal, any VST plugins, and throw it in the cab mode, which I'm not gonna lie, it kind of sucks. It's not the worst thing ever. I've certainly heard worse, and it is a more detailed implementation, but I don't know how many times I gotta say this. Pedal manufacturers, this is not a cab sim, okay? This is better than nothing. This is even better than Mesa Boogie's first attempt at the cab clone, which even they learned was not going to cut it on the cab clone 2, which is why they switched to a reactive load and actual impulse response loading like everyone else has been doing for the past, 15 years. This is at least attenuating those woofy low frequencies and harsh high frequencies that a preamplifier produces that ultimately gets cut out when going through a guitar cabinet and guitar speaker. Okay, that's all fine and dandy, and I appreciate that. This is at least a better approximation than a simple high-pass filter and a second-order low-pass filter. I do appreciate that, but it's even more confusing to me to see that they put some effort into making it more realistic, even if it is a little smoother than a real cab IR would be, and then still fall so short in the ultimate result because there's so much detail missing in the high frequencies. It just does not pair well with this preamp sound. And it really wouldn't take all that much, I don't think. There's already obviously some digital control going on. They have something of a waveform analyzer, waveform monitor that they're spitting out to this OLED. So I would have rather them charge another $20, $30 per pedal and just put a decent cab IR loader on this thing, because even without power amp simulation, it would be better than nothing. As I've shown in even my most basic VST tutorials, you can kind of bake in the EQ of a power amp and get really convincing results without having any of the coloration of the tubes there. And I think that would have been really nice to have on here. But as is, the cab mode is better than nothing. It's a decent backup, but compared to the real thing, or especially VST plugins to emulate the real thing, it's just not viable, and I kind of hate it. To wrap this one up, I can honestly say that the lackluster cab sim is about the only thing I can really complain about this, because even if you throw that out, the value that's still left here is still pretty astounding, I think, for the components that went into it and the sound that is achieved, which has made this, I think, my favorite amp-in-a-box pedal that I've ever played. There's definitely some room for improvement. Please make a V2 that has some IR loading and maybe a simplistic clean channel on it for us that, those of us that would use this in a preamplifier type scenario. But other than that, I mean, they nailed it. So congratulations, VOX, really cool. And I look forward to hopefully getting my hands on some of the other ones at some point. That brings us to what is without a doubt the weirdest pedal and perhaps the weirdest product that I have ever and maybe will ever demonstrate on this channel. The Rainger FX Minibar Liquid Analyzer Pedal. So we talked about this briefly, Leon Todd and I, last year when this was announced at NAMM. And some of you might already be familiar with the Rainger FX brand. This is the brainchild of one David Rainger, who's been building all sorts of wacky pedals for the past 10 or 11 years. And this is just one of his latest crazy designs. So this is a man that doesn't like to do things normally, which I very much appreciate. Everything that he's built looks like a mad scientist creation, and I think that's kind of what he's going for. The Dr. Freakenstein Chop Fuzz, for instance, uses an electrical throw switch like you would see in an old monster movie. You've got stuff like the Bleep, which uses, among other pedal designs, a pressure-sensitive touchpad to change the control, which is something I really want to try at some point. Even things that seemingly would be kind of normal type pedals, like the drone digital delay, the control scheme, the effects that are produced are just kind of weird, which is, I think, exactly what he's going for. So I'm all aboard. I love everything he's doing here, even if it has no relevance to the kind of music I play. And I think this one might be kind of a similar type of effect where the sounds that it produced, maybe I could get use out of it for a couple songs here and there, but really not up my alley. What makes this so interesting is that it takes something as simple as a gain knob or a tone control and completely remaps it to, well, liquid. So it's a very simple pedal on the surface, on and off switch, and a single output volume. That's it. The only thing you do to control this pedal otherwise is place different liquids in this chamber. And, well, there's no doubt about it. It does say pour liquid here. Now, this little design choice spawns more questions than we could possibly answer in one video, but even if we wanted to, we probably couldn't, because David Rainger himself doesn't know the answer to all of them. Like, why doesn't olive oil work? Because, which is fine by me. You know, the experimental nature of this design is at the heart of this pedal, so that's why I wanted to cover it. Now, there's a few different things to note about how this pedal works, and at least the way I believe it works based on my own experimentation. The first of which greets you the moment that you remove the lid from the material chamber. It's the screws below the text there. And besides anchoring the chamber to the PCB, this also acts apparently as kind of an anode cathode, or positive side, negative side of the circuit that has to do with the overall gain or level of distortion in this circuit, because the electrical conductivity of the liquid does come into play. So say a liquid that is more salty would have higher gain than one that is of the same color, same texture that does not. And I've been able to kind of verify that, as you know, certain alcohols have more gain on tap than just plain distilled water does. The other element to this is the optical components, which seems to be some sort of emitter receiver light setup here. You can see when you turn on the pedals, it fills with bright light. And I believe they're mapping this to the tone control, because he has stated that it doesn't really do as much of a bass or middle treble. It just kind of shifts the peak of the frequency response lower and higher, kind of like a cocked wah would. So you've essentially got like the most transparent liquids on the higher end of the side. Those are going to be the brightest, most aggressive. And then the darker liquids are going to be, well, the darkest, the most bassy. You know, put something like soy sauce in here and it's kind of like a bass big muff sound. You put something clear like water, and it's going to be a lot more ice picky and have a lot more high frequency content. In my experiments, the overall color of the liquid didn't matter so much. You know, if we're looking at something that was green or blue or red or yellow, if they were on the same scale of transparency, in general, the tone sounded more or less the same. It had more to do with just how dark or opaque, you know, something like milk, for example. Even though it is a bright liquid, it is very dark in the center because it's very opaque. So that plays into that pretty significantly. And other than that, there's only really a few other features and oddball behaviors of this pedal to mention. It is true bypass, which is good. Cleaning this out is not trivial, but it's also not that hard. I would recommend that you keep one of these guys on hand. It does help for less viscous liquids. For stuff like dish soap or honey, not so much. I would kind of shy away from using stuff that's that thick anyway. According to Mr. Rainger, leaving stuff in here long term doesn't seem to be a real problem. I'm sure if, 50 years from now, eventually you would rust out these screws at some point. So I, try to take everything out and clean it up the best I can whenever I'm done using it. I wouldn't store this with, something super salty in there or anything. The behavior of the pedal does change depending on how far the liquid is filled up. Not so much in the sense that 3 drops more is going to change anything, but if you only fill it up to, say, the halfway point of these photo sensors and then shake the pedal around, you're going to get some different behavior, because the light sensors are seeing something different, and it's making different amounts of contact on the screws. So you can get some weird effects if this thing is not stationary. And finally, if you receive this thing bone dry, new in package, it's not going to make a sound when you boot it up. You have to put in some liquid, which is kind of what you would expect, right? Air's not really going to conduct the circuit there, but as you add liquid to it and you try to remove it with a paper towel or whatever, there's still going to be some trace amounts left to conduct that electrical signal. So, don't be surprised that if you try to take everything out like I do in this next segment, you're going to hear a little bit of leftover signal in there, but it will eventually dry out and you'll have to do it all over again. The behavior of this pedal under that scenario does sort of point towards what this pedal could be under the hood. I've not removed the back panel because I have what I believe to be the number 3 production unit, and I'm not opening it up. So maybe it's not, but I'm going to continue to believe that unless told otherwise. The overall behavior of this sounds like a spitty, sputtering, gating fuzz, and that could very well be just because of the nature of liquids sloshing around and creating a similar effect. But it does have a fuzzy distortion quality to it that I would not use as just an overdrive pedal, something like that. Even on the lower gain side of things, it doesn't really play that well. This feels like a cranked up fuzz face, that kind of tone, which does work well in front of all kinds of applications, whether you're using an already kind of gainy amplifier and you want to doom out, or you want to use this as a more traditional fuzz. I think you can get by with that. The level of control, I think, is going to be the biggest problem in terms of trying to repeat this over and over if you want to. If not, that's kind of the point, is experimentation. And on some of the darker liquids, I think you can get a really cool fuzzed out bass tone, if that's what you're into. As you'll hear momentarily, this thing through a cabinet impulse response sounds pretty good by itself. It has most of the amplifier qualities that I think a lot of people would need for an effect like this, and it only gets better if you plug it into a tube amplifier. So lots of use for this thing for those that like that sound. Maybe not the best gig ready or tour ready implementation of it, but boy is this thing weird and a lot of fun. That pretty much wraps it up for today's edition of Pedalhead. I can say with a lot of confidence that this will probably stand as one of the most, if not the most, diverse episodes I've ever done in this playlist. Covered a large swath of price ranges and capability and tones today. I think my personal favorite as far as just a day-to-day use would be the cutting edge for the metal guys. This one definitely wins the award for most innovative and wacky and fun, and this one for the people's choice. So I think there's a lot of good things that come out of this one, and glad that I took some time to go back and check them all out. Now, I did not want to advertise this next part at the beginning of the video because spam comments and it throws off your views and all that. So for those of you that made it to the end, thank you so very much as always, but you have an opportunity to get this thing for free. So that's right, first Plague Scythe Studios pedal giveaway. It's not going to be the last. I have several more that I want to do for this, I guess you would call it season of Pedalhead. So if you are interested in this pedal and you have a good reason as to why you think you need it, then let me know. PlagueScytheStudios@gmail.com. If you got a story for me, if you've got something you're working on that you want to share, or maybe a piece of advice, or it's just something that you learned from watching this channel, all those things will increase your odds of winning this pedal if that's what you want. I want to keep this to US domestic, lower 48 only for now. We might figure out something later just because of shipping costs. This thing is so inexpensive that I just can't justify, $50 of shipping for this. But let's try that for the first time, and hit me up. Somebody's going to take that pedal home within the next couple weeks or so. And, depending on the response, we might just keep it locked to this video. But if I don't hear a whole lot of people, then, I might make a separate post at a later date. But other than that, that's it for today's Pedalhead. A lot going on. And again, if you made it to the end, thank you so very much. Let me know any questions, comments down below, and we'll see you next time. Bye.